Now, we have next, I'd like to welcome Michael Apathy on behalf of Climate Liberation Aotearoa, who will speak regarding item 8 and the international aviation and cruise ship emissions. Welcome.
Thank you. Kia ora katoa, koutou katoa. Thanks for hearing from us. I'm speaking for Climate Liberation Aotearoa. When I'm not working on climate issues, I work as a psychotherapist. And particularly when I'm working with youth, I know it's really important that they can look forward to a life worth living. So that's part of why I'm here talking with you about the climate and cruise ships today. Before we get to the emissions inventory itself, I want to deal with the idea that cruise ships bring us some benefits, because actually exactly the opposite is the case. And everything that I say here today will be backed up by evidence, good statistics or peer-reviewed academic papers, which we're showing the references for. Tourism overall, of course, employs people and supports our economy. But according to the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research, most tourist spending is domestic, not international tourism like the cruise ships. Domestic tourists spend roughly 58% versus 42% international tourism. Now, only 9% of those international tourists are cruise ship passengers, so we're talking about a small slice of tourist spending. The important statistic that I really want you to remember is that despite being 9% of the international tourist numbers, cruise ship passengers contribute only 3% of international tourist spending. So cruise ship passengers dramatically underspend in terms of their contribution to our economy compared to the alternative when tourists instead choose to fly in. This is according to the most recent statistics we have from 2019, but we know this pattern won't have changed because it's actually baked into the business model of the cruise ship industry. The cruise industry doesn't make money on the ticket. They make money through the passengers doing the vast majority of their spending by paying the cruise company, for instance, dining on board the cruise ships, where it doesn't benefit our communities at all. You might have the idea that the cruise industry is a kind of luxury experience, where you'd expect cruise passengers to be spending lots in our stores or restaurants. But according to Otago University tourism professor James Higham, this isn't the case. I quote, "One of the realities of the cruise industry is that it's grown very rapidly over the last decade or so. The profile of passengers has changed from relatively small numbers of very wealthy passengers to a large number of less affluent passengers. I think the concern that's increasingly widely expressed is that many cruise passengers are booked on board to shore excursions that are basically operated by the cruise company and actually spend very little discretionary time or money shopping in local communities." End quote. So you've heard that the cruise ship industry takes as much of the passenger spending as possible, and they don't share the benefits in the same way that other forms of tourism do. For instance, the cruise industry is built on massive tax evasion. This is widely reported, but the following information is from TaxWatch UK. By incorporating places such as Panama and Liberia, cruise ship companies avoid tax, on average just paying just 0.8% tax. So please don't think for a moment that our economy is reliant on or benefits from the cruise ship industry, when cruise ship tourists are economically the worst sorts of tourists for us and would be far better off when tourists choose to fly instead of cruise. So hopefully I've dealt with the idea that cruise ships benefit us. What are the negatives of cruise ships? Otago University academic Dr. Inga Smith calculated that a cruise ship holiday to New Zealand emits 4 times the greenhouse gas emissions of an equivalent holiday flying and staying in hotels. She says, from a climate change perspective, going on a cruise ship is one of the worst holidays that you can take. The cruise ship industry is so polluting that climate activists like me would actually encourage people to fly instead. Cruise ship passengers cause other air pollution too. The heavy fuel oil that they burn puts small ultrafine particulates into our air that are carcinogenic. In terms of these polluting small particulates, one cruise ship is actually the equivalent of 1 million cars. It's ultrafine, mostly invisible, so we don't think about it. but the cost that we're paying is very, very real. It's the cost paid when people die from cancer, from air pollution caused by fossil fuels. According to the British Medical Journal, fossil fuel pollution kills 5 million people per year annually. They're poisoning the passengers, they're poisoning the Littleton community, and wafting that poison over the hills into the rest of our city too. According to a peer-reviewed study in the Marine Policy Journal, cruise ships are responsible for 1/4 of all ocean waste, despite being only 1% of the merchant fleet. This is a huge problem because our ocean ecosystems are under massive pressure and hundreds of millions of people rely on ocean ecosystems for food. According to Angela Tuberga, a professor of tourism at the University of Palmas in Brazil, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week for very low pay are normal working conditions on cruise ships. Cubans are a big part of the cruise ship workforce, with some of the biggest cruise companies putting them in conditions that have been described by human rights organizations and members of the European Parliament as semi-slavery. So cruise ships are terrible for workers' rights. So in summary, not only do cruise ships bring us no benefits, but they're contributing to climate chaos, they're killing people with air pollution, they trash our oceans, and their working conditions can be as bad as semi-slavery. I'll hand over to Chris.
I'm Chris Allen. I'm a student and activist studying at the University of Canterbury. The fact that cruise ship emissions are now being counted in the inventory is a great first step, but it accomplishes nothing on its own. We demand that they also be included in Christchurch's total emissions, the ones that count towards our emissions targets. The emissions are being released into the atmosphere. They have to be part of our reduction goals as well. You lack adequate plans to achieve your goals, and that's why just this week you've been slammed in media for failing to be on track to meet your 2030 emissions targets. You're not yet taking the radical action required to get us out of this mess. This is partially understandable. You rely somewhat on central government, and the policies have been unreliable. This is not a reason to stop acting, however. You still have power, even in influencing central government. Declarations of climate urgency and the nuclear free movement both worked like this, local government taking the lead. We will soon be making similar demands of local governments around New Zealand, asking them to listen to their constituents and their consciences to take that first step. In November this year, the Climate Commission will be making recommendations to central government. They will very likely recommend the inclusion of cruise ship emissions in our targets, and while Central doesn't seem to care much about the climate, if councils like you have already taken that first step, we believe they will too. We need momentum. To get enough councils taking this step by November will be a challenge, and starting now will help a lot. We believe that you are the right council to take the lead in this, as you did, and you were one of the first to declare a climate emergency. If it helps, this is the sort of policy that's being picked up around the world already. The UK and the EU have chosen to include emissions from international shipping and aviation, including cruise ship emissions, into their trading schemes and targets from 2026. Others will follow shortly. I want to stress the first step in a plan to tackle cruise ship emissions is to stop subsidizing a pollution that would ratepayers' money. Christchurch NZ takes ratepayers' money to sponsor the yearly New Zealand Cruise Ship Association conference and spends money on paid staff time and resources to train and administer the Volunteer Cruise Ambassador program. Ratepayers are fed up with rate hikes. As a council, you're obviously financially squeezed. And in this situation, we're still paying ratepayers' money to subsidize rich international tax-avoiding companies that are negative for us environmentally and economically. It is time to stop. Those of you who are left-leaning should align with ending the subsidies, because subsidizing big polluters isn't just, and it isn't putting our money where the need is greatest. Those of you who are more right-leaning politically should think about why are we actually interfering with the free operation of the market by putting in these subsidies. Shouldn't industries be allowed to thrive or fail based on their own merits without taking all money from ratepayers? If we are going to interfere in the market by subsidizing, shouldn't we put on subsidies where our community is going to get the greatest benefit? If so, the statistics we've quoted are clear that any other form of tourism would give us a better return on investment. In summary, what we want you to do is to count cruise ship emissions now in the overall emissions total in the inventory and count them in the city's climate targets. The statistic might be estimates not perfect, but the risks of inaction are greater. We also want you to actually put in a real plan, a radical plan, a serious plan to address these emissions. The first step of solving all the subsidies. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions?